you have to aim high, right? So it's, there are enough people on this planet who are happy with the status quo and who don't question things, who are not curious. So if you really want to add value, and I really invite you to look at this from a societal perspective almost. What is the contribution you can make? And we are so privileged in with the access to education and how I grew up. So there is a wonderful opportunity to make an impact and give back.
This is the Nucleate Podcast, the voice of the next generation of biotech leaders.
Hi, and welcome to the Nucleate Podcast. My name is Anastasia, and I'll be your host today. On today's episode, we are joined by Professor Dr. Dominik Rüttinger, who is the Global Head of Research and Early Development for Oncology at Bayer Pharmaceuticals, where he leads efforts to advance next-generation precision oncology therapies and targeted radionuclide treatments. With over 2 decades of experience at the intersection of science, medicine, and drug development, Dominik is recognized for pioneering new approaches to cancer treatment. Before joining Bayer in 2021, Dominik held senior leadership roles at Roche and Genentech, as well as with Micromet Inc., which was acquired by Amgen, a biotech company pioneering the development of T-cell bispecifics. Dominik began his career as a physician scientist, earning his MD and PhD in tumor immunology from LMU Munich, and completing postdoc at Oregon Health and Science University. He is board certified in surgical oncology and continues to serve as associate professor at LMU Munich. Throughout his career, Dominik has focused on translating cutting-edge science into therapies that meaningfully improve patient outcomes. His work spans drug discovery, translational medicine, clinical development, and building strategic partnerships to accelerate innovation. At Bayer, he is leading a global push to redefine the future of oncology throughout precision drug development and targeted alpha therapies. We hope you enjoy this episode. Thanks for joining Nucleate Podcast, Dominik.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So we are very excited. We have a lot to discuss, a lot of topics, a lot of different things to dive into. But let's start chronologically. So let's go back to your childhood. Could you explain a little bit where you grew up, how it was, what your family did, and ultimately what led you to science in the first place?
That's a big question to start out with. I was born in Munich, Germany, and I want to say I had a quite protected and safe childhood. So regular boy, hanging out with friends. I was very much into soccer and skiing early on with the proximity of the Alps and the Munich surroundings. But one thing may have been a bit different in I'm going to say the core family. So my parents and I still have 3 sisters. And there was a high affinity to technologies, I want to say. So my dad was a aircraft engineer. So he worked on different types of airplanes, fighter jets, and helped design and construct those. My sister, for example, so one of 3 sisters, she moved very early into electrical engineering. So she's an engineer in that field, which is, at that time a bit unusual for girls to move into that space, but a high affinity. So I think that was a bit different. And then, and a lot of this is retrospective analysis. So it's difficult to say, is that real data? But Munich was at that time and still is kind of the same. Lots of traditions in Bavaria, and we all have a couple of cliches around that. But they always try to add that high tech, biotech and tech bio spirit, and we're aiming back then already at becoming a hub for these topics. And we're quite successful. I think a key key driver was the attractiveness of the city and surroundings to talent and their families. So I think these were a couple of factors that kind of, drew me into the technology space, science, but no physicians in my core family. So that came a little later.
So what was the reason for that? Because I can imagine if you are surrounded by engineers, the most easiest way is to become one as well. So like what led you to joining not only medical school, but also a PhD program, which I'm not sure at the time, was it simultaneously, or did you do like first medical school and then a PhD?
Yeah. So from a organizational setup, procedural, it was an overlapping process. So you would focus on the med school, but then start the PhD part relatively early. So a bit of an overlapping mechanism. Not that different in the end from other countries like the US. I should add one more thing that did influence what I did, and that was an early exposure to the US. So I spent some time in the US when I was 15, 16 years old. And I think that also shaped more my global interest, added to the engineering. And then the science was really driven by the unresolved challenges. I loved any type of riddle, the impossible ones. The Mission Impossible had theme had a great attractiveness to me always. I think that is really what attracted me towards the medical profession, but also the medical field, science. So I can't give you this one event or a story of a cancer patient in my immediate family, and I have those, but I'd be lying if I'd say that's kind of been a life-changing event for me or anything like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's a gradual process, very, very multifactorial, and in the end, basically, there is this decision and this interest to solve problems, and medicine has a lot of them. Just out of curiosity, because I feel when people start medical school, they have those big ideas of curing cancer. When I joined my PhD program, I thought I will cure glioblastoma, which was naive at the time. So was there something comparable when you started your path in medicine and science?
I mean, so what you just mentioned is something I would say if you'd ask me about actually career advice. You have to aim high, right? So it's, there are enough people on this planet who are happy with the status quo and who don't question things, who are not curious. So if you really want to add value, and I really invite you to look at this from a societal perspective almost, what is the contribution you can make? And we are so privileged in with the access to education and how I grew up. So there is a wonderful opportunity to make an impact and give back. So that is one part, aiming high. I think I want to say you early on learn or should learn what good looks like. You mentioned glioblastoma, that you won't make an impact without raising the bar. This is such a hard to treat tumor type and devastating disease for patients. You got to aim high. You have to question the status quo. You have to think differently. And if there's one kind of an unmet need in the market of drug developments, it's certainly people who can imagine a radically different state. So people who are able to say, hey, we are going to find a cure for glioblastoma, right? So really starting from that more from the end and saying, hey, we have found a cure for glioblastoma. And then you can reflect, how did we do that? That type of thinking is I think what we could use more of. So, some early career advice already at this point. But I think, the way you're describing it, it's there may be a little bit of a naivete, yes, but that I think can actually open new avenues.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So aim high and, like maybe this, like being naive and coming into a project with new eyes and to someone who was there for 10, 15 years, has seen it all and a lot of failures. Maybe they're a little bit hesitant to, kind of try out more ideas, new ideas. And so I think being new to something, to a new project, to a new group is maybe also an asset. And as you said, early career advice, not sure if you also would agree with me, but for our listeners out there, make sure to raise your voice and to, kind of explain what you're thinking and present your ideas, and to be open to being criticized about them, but also be open to, kind of pushing forward your ideas if you think that's the new avenue that we should look into.
Very good. Yeah.
Okay, then back to your to medical school, to you as a medical student, physician, scientist, seeing both worlds, and ultimately you pivoted, or you went into oncology. So the question is, what was it, this unsolved need of, or like unmet need of cancers, that we don't understand them, that we can cure them, or like we cannot prevent them? Was it something that attracted you to the field, or what was it in the end?
Yeah. So again, a bit of a retrospective analysis, obviously. So, from a confidence in what I say, this is highly influenced, of course. But I want to say, in hindsight, what I always tried to do is, in whatever I did, by the way, this was not exclusive to my career or my profession. I try to identify positive reference points. That's a term I like to use, which is nothing else but a description on moments. Sometimes these are tiny little moments where something happens that felt fulfilling, rewarding, where I felt like, I got home that night and said, "Oh my God, this was a good day." So I call that positive reference points, and whatever I did, I tried to get more of those. So that was my strategy back then, and quite frankly, it still is. And that worked well, in the sense that I never thought about, is this going to be oncology, or is it going to be cardiovascular research, or kidney disease, or the other unmet needs certainly sit elsewhere, in as well as neurodegenerative disease, Parkinson's and other areas. But it was really the field of oncology, and of course, you said it in the introduction. I'm a surgical oncologist by training, which is a long training and a tough one. And you can focus on different areas there as well. But early on, it was pretty clear that I was gonna go into the oncology field. The training I went through was very broad. So I spent more than 2 years on an intensive care unit, where today I benefit greatly from that time, because there's so much. If you're in drug development, you always you're testing a new mode of action, or a new medicine to be. So you don't know everything about physiology, pathophysiology, and that's exactly what you learn a lot in an intensive care unit. It's about human physiology, pathophysiology, understanding adverse events, kind of these things. This is not a data-driven science like oncology, where you run a controlled trial and then you have the data. That's something everyone can kind of pick up on, right? It's that hands-on clinical experience that you need. So other examples were a pretty long time in the endoscopy unit, very, very rewarding time, and then the surgical training, of course. But we uh, went into interdisciplinary approaches early on at the university in Munich. So where oncologists would come together with surgeons and radiologists and, you name it, any other discipline, and would form focus groups and tumor boards. And so that definitely shaped me as well in terms of how I think we should be working in this field.
So, procedural question. Surgical oncology is something that is very known in US, but not very known in Germany. So did you do internal medicine, then specialization in oncology, and then kind of a fellowship in surgical oncology, or what was the process?
Yeah. So I really have to say that the curriculum I went through at the University of Munich at that time, which, let me think, I started in 1996, so quite some time ago. But I think it was a very advanced and visionary curriculum at that point, where we would not just go through surgical training, but again, spend time on on different wards and always in interdisciplinary teams. And the oncology focus, came very early. So it was not a sequential training. It was always overlapping. So I want to say the whole training, including a focus on thoracic oncology, it took about 10 years. So I spent a total of 12 years in academia prior to moving into industry.
Okay, let's go there. You mentioned industry, your move to industry, which was, when I'm not mistaken, to 2017. Can you explain, or especially to our listeners, what your thoughts were behind, you are already very established in academia, you're very highly regarded and highly qualified physician scientist. What were your thinking going to industry? Was it like a new challenge that you wanted to pursue? And maybe a little bit about your decision process, which would be very valuable for our listeners.
Yeah, and give you a little anecdote on, because it may be much less spectacular than you may think. The son of a CSO of a Munich-based biotech that I eventually joined, he did an internship on my ward. So I got to know him, speaking of positive reference points, very nice guy, very, motivated. And then he said, listen, my father's working for this company, and I think they're kind of doing what you're interested in, which was lung cancer research at that point. And so, and then he connected us and we started to talk, and it turns out the company was a spin-off originally from our university in Munich. So I knew a lot of the founders, and it was, it was just a good, a good opportunity to kind of stick my toe into the water there in terms of industry, drug development. Very dynamic company. Some of the listeners may be familiar with the company called Micromet. They were later acquired by Amgen. So, it's what I'm trying to tell you with this is it's a lot of times these opportunities where you follow your instinct, and you're saying, hey, this is a logical next step. This may hold additional growth opportunities for me. There's something I've not done, but it feels good. That was the type of decision making I used back then.
How was the adjustment process? Because medicine is very you know how your day more or less are gonna look like. You're gonna see the patients, you have the rounds, you have to make sure that they don't die, you have surgeries, you have to make sure that everyone is like not happy, but kind of is feeling well, doing well. So I guess joining a new company, another like still a startup, like how was it?
Yeah. So it was very different, I want to say. In a couple things, and again, a little anecdote. I had joined the company and um, they gave me this office, which was a nice office, and I had never been in an office by myself in my entire 12 years at a university hospital. I was always sharing it with multiple colleagues, so it was very little uh, privacy in that sense. So I was sitting in that office, and I don't know if it was a day or two or something, but I was kind of waiting for someone to tell me what to do. So I was kind of that's the way it worked for a long time in the hospital, where it was a lot of it was almost like a daily triaging in the hospital. I don't. I think we took very good care of our patients, and it worked really well. But still, it was overwhelming in a sense every day. So that was such a change. And then realizing you got to be proactive. The expectation for you is to take ownership, right? To basically say, hey, here's a program, a molecule that we want to develop. So what can I do to make this a successful program? So that type of perspective away from a more hierarchical situation, that was fascinating to experience. But I was, it was refreshing, huge learning opportunity, and I'm glad I did it. And then you add a little bit of the biotech spirit. I loved it was a young team. It was very dynamic, very agile. But even back then, it came with lots of pressure. I learned terminology like cash reach, which I had never heard before. We had never um, been dependent in that sense of of investors and analysts, and not to say that there's no economic pressure in a university hospital. The opposite is true, but you're just not as exposed to it as in a smaller company.
And that's a very interesting point. And a lot of our guests that we had on the podcast that were, kind of switched from academia to industry or to starting their own companies or being investors, they mentioned this. Basically, you have to unlearn everything that you learned in academia in order to be successful in industry. Like starting from the how you talk about the research in academia, we have this is what I did. You start with everything what I did, very detailed methods, and then a very small sentence of this might be helpful for this, versus in industry, it's the other way around. You start with, this is what I'm gonna do with this. And then basically telling a little bit about like everything that's going into this process. So how was the adjustment for you, and maybe some practical tips for our listeners who come from these backgrounds, like how to be better at it in a fast time?
So I'd like to offer a different angle of what you said around unlearning. I think it can work well if you look at it as a toolbox that you have, and you adding tools every time you learn something, or you complete part of your education or training or professional experience. So you keep adding tools. So I found that a lot of the things that I learned in academia kept being very helpful. Maybe not at first glance, you're right, because some of these things are so different. But let's take an example of what one thing I think we were really good at in the academic environment, in particular in surgical oncology, was decision making, right? So it was a lot of times it was very clear the decision making model. So we would not go for a consensus model. We would not take a vote. There was no time, right? So you in the interest of the patient's safety and well-being, you had to take decisions quickly, and they better had a high sensitivity and specificity. So they better be good decisions. So that spirit, taking a risk as well because you have to. So that is something you can certainly transfer, I think, from clinical care and academic. It's not only clinical care, obviously. There's a lot you involved in teaching a lot, and you involved in research as well. So a lot of good tools in the toolbox that you are able to use, and then you just add tools. And the biggest watch out is thinking drug development in an industry sense. You don't. It is definitely a world on its own. It is, it is helpful to approach it in a humble and modest fashion, realizing that it's really an art. Good drug development, industry drug development is definitely very challenging. So I would advise anyone to let go of any type of sense that you've done it all and you know it all, even if you have worked as a clinical investigator and kind of know the terminology. It's different. So that would be probably so ownership, the toolbox, and a little humbleness, and you'll be good in your transition.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. 3 action items and very important ones, especially being humble and not, kind of this usual thing which you see sometimes in the clinic, that young doctor just out of med school thinks he's better than like the nurse because he did medical education that she didn't. So, kind of staying humble. And even though you have had a very long path and have seen a lot of things, that you still, kind of, as you said, stay humble. Okay, then moving on, you mentioned that at some point Micromet was acquired by Amgen, and your next stop in your career was going to Roche, which is like another big transition and something that I'm also curious about. How did it happen? Did you have any thoughts going back to medicine, like this more traditional clinical physician scientist being? And also, how was the transition there? Because going from a small startup to a big company like Roche is something that also requires a lot of adjustment.
Yeah. So again, I want to say this was opportunity driven. So it was a big coincidence that at the time Amgen acquired Micromet, that a very attractive role came up at Roche Genentech. Again, in the translational field, so early oncology development, and I knew I definitely always wanted to spend time in a larger organization, so one of the big pharmas, and obviously Roche Genentech is a wonderful example there. So that was part of the plan, but again, opportunity driven. So it's not like I was looking to make that transition at that point. The differences are obvious, and I should add that I always kept a foot in the academic world. So I still hold a faculty position at the University of Munich, and at that point, for a long time I kept running my lab at the university, and so you may say, hey, the guy had problems letting go, but I do want to say it was more driven by the scientific curiosity and obviously the network, and I am personally incentivized still by things that are probably more incentives for the academics, really advancing the field, even if it's not translating immediately in an impactful new drug potentially, but really understanding the biology, diving deep, that type of thing that we can sometimes do a little less in industry research. So I'm still very interested in this part. Um, and then in a larger organization, you have lots of advantages. There's usually some deeper pockets. You have less worries around resources. You usually have uh, uh, not only a good breadth but a good depth of talent as well. So they're experts for every aspect of drug development, which is very refreshing and a wonderful learning opportunity. Um, and then you find stuff where decision making may be not as quick as you're used to it in a biotech, and everything takes a little longer, and you may be less forced to take tough decisions, and then you kind of you kind of you go into a meeting and discussing should it be option A and option B. You walk out and say, hey, well, let's do both. That's something you would not do in a biotech environment. So these things are, a little different. Your portfolio is larger, which is also has been one of my biggest steps in my career to move from a program responsibility to a portfolio responsibility. So it was not the number of reports or the budget or something. It was usually that. So, being responsible for 1, 2, 3 programs is very different from, thinking about a large portfolio of assets, including opportunity costs, trade-off discussions. And that is obviously something that you have less at a smaller company and more at a large player.
Can you tell us a little bit more about this, what you mentioned, being responsible for a big portfolio and kind of having different kind of decisions that you have to make, and also the daily life is a little bit different. So a little bit more like without, kind of telling anything confidential, more info on basically how your daily life is structured and what kind of decision you're making on a daily basis.
Very good question. I have 3 kids myself, and they're now grown up and at 17, 21, and 23. But I remember times where they were asking, David, what do you do? When you go to work. And I have to admit, there were seconds where I hesitated and said, that's a good question. What do I actually do? Because I can't say I'm writing emails, or I can't say I sit in meetings all day. That's not a good answer. The kids want to feel impact. They want to be proud of what I do. So but kidding aside, building and maintaining a larger development portfolio, I think is the core of what we do. And I can give you a couple of numbers. So the organization I lead now at Bayer has around 240 employees, and that reaches from a research group, reaches to translational scientists, including biomarker expert, computational biology, clinical pharmacology, and then we have a very strong clinical group, and that is basically a translation medicine unit. And that entire group works on the early part of our portfolio. And my job is really to enable that group. I heard someone say it's actually quite easy. You hire good people, you listen to them, you pay them well, and then you get out of the way. I do think that's a very good way to put it. And then we take a lot of decisions, and that includes go and no-go decisions on our programs, which is a large part of our work, where we try to take the right decisions and really make sure we avoid false negatives, which is basically where you have a drug at hand and you decide to discontinue it, but it could have been a drug. These are really bad for the business, for patients, for all of us. And then you have the false positives where you decide to take something forward and maybe start a larger confirmatory phase 3 study. But it just, doesn't yield the results we were hoping for. So both cases we try to avoid. And success rates are relatively low still, and you probably know that.
That's also something that I want to stay a little bit on. Basically, this decision making and having a lot of factors to look into. And one of our guests, Dr. Powell, he has a book on 7 programs, basically that he explained how they came about, what decisions were made, and how ambiguity and also kind of some chances and influence this. And this is something that when I was reading the book, I was very tense because it's just you read about all these people who work their life 10 years in a program, and then it gets discontinued because you have some kind of adverse effect, or it doesn't work the way it should work, or you thought it will be working. Can you tell us your perspective on that, on this decision makings, and on those failures and successes that you are encountering while you're pushing your portfolio forward?
Very good, and very likely the central question, Anastasia, of all we do as a field, not just what I do, but the entire field. We have success rates that are quite sobering. So if you start something at lead generation or even earlier target ID, we're looking at a 1 to 2% success rate of this ever becoming a medicine. And then that goes up a little bit if you enter phase 1, depending on what the data you look at, but it's somewhere around 9-10% success rate of a phase 1 asset in oncology ever becoming a medicine, an approved drug. That is very sobering. So the first thing I think about there is how do I get people excited to work on something like this? Just imagine you're working on a devastating disease where, despite all progress, it's a deadly disease for many patients. That in itself is a lot of pressure for people. Yes, for the clinicians, probably more than for us now in industry, but it's very present. There's a high urgency, and then you add, a devastating disease, and then what you do is yielding a very low success rate. And that's not a good combination. That's not primarily a fun space to operate in. But then you also see these researchers in the lab, and you can tell they feel like anything they touch could be making a huge difference for patients, right? So every time they start something new, that could make the biggest difference ever. And that is unique, right? So that is, I don't think you find that in many other industries, that type of possibility of a huge reward. Also from an economic perspective, of course, for the company. So now the key question that we all after, and I'm sure William told you the same thing, and you may know that William and I worked together in the past, and we had lots of discussions around this. We are looking for people with a 10% mindset. That sounds a little counterintuitive, but really we need people who constantly see the opportunity and the 10% success rate. And we need people who want to take the right decisions and not people who want to be right. Because if you want to be right, you're always going to say, oh, this is not going to work. 90% of cases, you're going to be right. So we really need that mindset, and that's really a drug hunting mindset that this describes. I'm sure you've heard of the term unbiasing drug development. Huge field. I want to say it's probably the most important field. What I mean with that is we tend to introduce biases with anything we do every day, but in drug development, that can actually um, determine if we're successful or not. The two probably most prominent biases in drug development are the confirmatory bias, where you overweight data that supports your belief or your hypothesis. So you run 10 experiments, or two, you like the outcome, and that's what you present in the meeting. I'm exaggerating, but that's kind of confirmatory bias. And then we also subject to champions biases a lot, where we, for example, have a rock star in our lab, and since he's a rock star, he should know. And then all of a sudden, we have our entire portfolio full of things he generated. But that's maybe not the way to go after, finding a cure for our patients. So these two are just examples of many, many, many biases that we are exposed to. So the decision-making part, huge topic, unbiasing our decision-making. And there are different ways to do this. I want to say almost all large drug development organizations have a framework that does exactly that. Published frameworks include the 6 R's that AstraZeneca has put forward. There is Roche Genentech one that is called the BAR. We now at Bayer have one that we spoke about publicly that we call precision drug development. And those tools are really nothing else but unbiasing instruments, where you describe criteria that help us identify the programs that have the highest probability of technical success. And then we focus on those and transport those and accelerate those and put our best people and resources on that. And I think that's I could go on decision making. You can tell that's a topic I'm very passionate about, because as someone said, winning the lottery but buying all the tickets is just not an option.
That makes a lot of sense. And in this, kind of decision-making biases, very radical thoughts, like, would it help if we, kind of eliminated the human factor at all? Like, kind of saying those machines, like AI right now in drug development, is a very hot topic. And like basically saying, here is something that we did before, this worked, here, this machine, this AI algorithm, go and find us some drug targets. What are your thoughts?
Rule number 1, I think, is let's not get into a competition, artificial versus natural intelligence. I think that's rule number 1, because we want to find the synergies. We want AI and machine learning enabled algorithms to help us take better decisions, right? So if we look at this as a development decision support, I think that's the way to look at it, and that's working already. AI used to be something that helped us see that we couldn't see. So really patterns in large data sets was the stronghold, I would say. And that works really well in places where you have these, incredibly large data sets, like radiology. We've had wonderful examples where, we just couldn't see, based on a CT scan of a lung tumor, if that tumor was likely to harbor any mutation that was considered actionable from a clinical perspective. Now, with help of AI and good learning data sets, of course, that is possible now, and we get hints, and then we can basically very selectively test patients with a certain feature in their CT scans, and then, these could be actionable mutations. In terms of overall drug discovery and the whole drug development process, I find it interesting. We will never really know what the benefit is because we're not going to run a controlled experiment, right? So we're not going to develop a drug without AI and one with, and do that in a controlled experiment because we use AI all the time already, right? So there's not that experiment will not happen. So we won't able to really prove what the time is we saving and what the acceleration component or maybe also savings. And there are downsides, I think, and that is that your data set by definition is retrospective. So you may your AI algorithm may be more based on, for example, tolerability, because we know that tolerability issues in early development are one of the key reasons drugs are not successful. So then AI may overweigh that, and then we may get drugs going forward that are very safe, but maybe not effective. So we maybe again be introducing biases that come through the data set, not through the algorithm, of course. But overall, I think we are using a lot of AI-enabled tools. Give you one example around target identification, for example, to deconvolute biologic networks. So there are now really fancy and cool apps where you basically punch in a target of interest, and then based on any available data set out there, it gives you the neighboring checkpoints or the neighboring structures, and that could help us come up with new ideas around new targets and drug development. So, again, AI, machine learning, huge field, massive impact, but you take a close look of what's really helpful. That would be my summary.
Basically right now there are thoughts of using AI not only in the drug development but also afterwards. So in this push for making drugs or making drug development less expensive and much faster. So one of the touch points for using AI would be is supposed to be using this in clinical trials, or using AI for clinical trials to make them ultimately faster and cheaper. What are your thoughts on that? Will it work? Can it work? How can it work? And also, should we make clinical trial process faster because of this whole drug interactions and the long-term risks of adverse effects that we would maybe not see if we just make everything faster?
Yeah, so very, very good question. I think there are a couple of dimensions we can still optimize around how we do our clinical trials, how fast we do them, and if we do that, I don't think we're necessarily jeopardizing the patient's safety, which is absolutely key. We have to remember that in our early oncology trials, we a lot of times include very advanced stage patients. So for them, the risk-benefit ratio is obviously a very different one than if you run a trial in inflammatory bowel disease or rheumatology or again neurodegenerative. So the patient population matters a lot. But I still think we can be faster. We are very grateful to many different regulatory authorities that have open pathways towards faster development, where they really see their mission in making successful and impactful drugs available to patients faster. So many of these pathways exist. And you ask about AI and machine learning. I think there's definitely a role in accelerating. Um, it, it whenever it comes to huge data sets having to be digested quickly, where we need to find patterns in these data sets. So I think wherever that happens, I want to say it's almost like you know a triangle of a clear hypothesis, a large data set, and augmented computing. Whenever you have that triangle coming together, that's a stronghold. And then I think you said it. The discrimination, is this a development decision support that I'm looking for? So do I want to take better decisions on my development programs, or is it a treatment decision support? So do I want to help a physician take the decision on, what's the best sequencing of a drug? What are patients who are more likely to experience an adverse event? So these questions are really treatment decision support questions, and we got to be clear what it is. So it will be very different tools for either one, and we can speak about the importance and relevance of real world data if there's time. That's obviously one of these examples where you're creating an increasingly large data set that needs to be digested and where we want to see patterns.
Yeah, I mean, we have maybe 5 more minutes to talk about this. If you can just tell us a little bit more detail, and also how your clinical perspective helps there. So basically, this what we think might benefit the patient is not always the same as what the patients think. And you have seen it both.
Yeah, very, very, very good question. And there's so much, there's such a huge ethical component in this, where you really want to sit down with a patient and understand, is this about expanding the lifespan in an oncology patient? Is it about quality of life? And I recently spoke to a member of a patient advocacy group, a younger lady. I think she was in her mid-40s, and she had been on a drug for her lung cancer for more than 10 years. So really a chronic treatment. And she was representing the future patient population where we think we're going to see much more younger patients. So we know there's an increase in the so-called early onset cancers. So where patients are below the age of 50 at first diagnosis, that increased massively. So that is mainly due to environmental factors, nutrition, sleep deprivation, a couple of these things. And she had been on drug, and I asked her around what's most important to her, because she has some adverse events. She tolerates the drugs well, but she had to switch twice. Always targeting the same driving mutation that her tumor harbors. And she said it actually changes. So at first, it was absolutely mandatory for her to do anything she could to see her kids grow up. And she had this target of all of them. I think she had 3 kids, of all of them finishing high school. So she would have done anything, she said, and tolerated anything. Now she says kids are out of her home. It changed. She said now it's much more about quality of life. She gave these examples of a bit of a brain fog that she suffers from. She has a bit of a hard time memorizing things. So she said she's not willing to do anything just to live longer. So quality of life change. What I'm trying to tell you with that, it's a very tailored decision, a very individualized decision. So ideally, if we know that the way we treat patients 10, 20 years from now, so more chronic treatment, more lines of treatment, because patients will stay on drug longer, they will start their cancer journey earlier. So we need probably kinder medicines to start with. What I mean with that is just better tolerated, where these younger patients who have a life and kids and a job are able to do all that despite being on that medicine. And then ideally, and that's not something we can do from a drug development, but we can provide the tools and the right medicines, and then enable physicians really to individualize the treatment as much as possible. So be another aspect of precision medicine really that we don't usually talk about that much, but equally important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So basically, being aware that sometimes just having a better life is better than having a longer life. And ultimately, what maybe in this, kind of in this topic of aiming high is, do you think that we'll be able to prevent cancer at some point with kind of the new ideas that are circulating right now, like tissue or cell reprogramming, having better tools, having better molecular markers? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I want to say it's almost common knowledge or even common sense that, and you know that we would be able to prevent a large number of our new cancer cases. So many different tumor types are preventable. So any type of cancer prevention is definitely the right thing to do. If I had to decide from a let's say from a health authority or a government perspective, I would definitely invest in these programs. Very impactful, not trivial, to be clear. So cancer screening is a very interesting topic where we will see also a lot of advances. The methodology for early cancer detection is going to be much better, but it comes with a couple of challenges. Just to give you an example, we probably can categorize the new cases into two groups, which are consequential and so-called non-consequential cancers. And you will pick up a lot out of the later group, where you detect through a new, let's say, ctDNA-based method on a blood draw, you detect a signal, but that patient would have never really suffered from that cancer, right? It's a so-called non-consequential cancer. So now there's a risk of overtreatment. Or you take false positive results where you can really cause a lot of trouble for the individual who has this false positive result and thinks he or she has cancer. So there are challenges with that, but I'm still convinced that overall, over the next decades, we will be able to detect cancer much earlier, which will result in a higher cure rate if we able to come up with earlier intervention. And then the field of what you mentioned already around cancer prediction is going to be a big topic in my view, where you, for example, and we're making advances there already based on large real-world data sets, so longitudinal data sets, you're able to predict who is at risk or at higher risk of actually getting cancer, and we can then be more tailored in our screening programs, for example. So that cancer prevention, cancer prediction, these will be huge topics, and a wonderful field for AI and machine learning enabled analysis of large real-world data sets.
I would love to go more into that, but we are at time right now. So last question. If you're given unlimited resources to pursue anything, like any program, or maybe let's also something that's outside of drug development. If you were given unlimited resources, what would you focus on?
So first of all, I don't think it's a good idea to give someone unlimited resources because you take away one of the key drivers for urgency, discipline, good decision making. One of the things that makes so many biotech companies so successful is because they just have to focus. They have to take decisions, tough decisions, no-go decisions, have to let go of things, have to take risks, and all of that because they're short in resources. And when I mean resources, and I'm sure you mean the same thing, it's not only cash, it's time, it's talent, it's a couple things. But let's say we'll do it anyways, and you'll give me a lot of money. I would probably, I would not work on something that is exciting because it's exciting or it pushes boundaries or that I would very much orient in a true unmet need. So really something that helps as many people as possible. And I think oncology is actually considering what's coming our way, as I just described, the future patient population, younger patients. I would definitely invest in that space still. And now you can tell I definitely don't have an economic hat on. This is really just from where do I think I could make an impact as a researcher? I would be mercilessly kind of proceeding on investing in true unmet need areas, which will be oncology and neurodegenerative disease in my view. Uh, um, and then with a lot of discipline and great talent around me, I would form a group. And you know what I have in mind there? A little bit like these movies, Dirty Dozen and Ocean's 11, and that's how I would probably select my leadership team for that type of endeavor. And like true experts, everyone a little awkward, but they can definitely work in a team and make a huge difference. And then you give me all the resources, and I'm sure we'll come to great results.
This sounds amazing. And I bet a lot of our listeners are, kind of right now, this moment, thinking about themselves and just trying to reach out to you to apply to join your team because it sounds amazing. So on this note, thank you very much for joining the podcast. Thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. Like we covered a lot. We talked about a lot of different things. And if we had unlimited resources for this interview, I would have loved to continue talking. But I think for now, thank you very much.
Thank you, Anastasia, for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Nucleate Podcast. Be sure to subscribe if you'd like to keep up with future episodes. See you next time.